The day my sister Melissa called me crying, I remember I was slicing strawberries in my kitchen, the sun pouring through the window like melted honey across the counter. Her voice cracked through the speakerphone, brittle and raw, and I dropped, the knife to the cutting board, as if the weight of her words had frozen my hands. She said she was being evicted. She said she had nowhere else to go. She said she needed me. I hadn't spoken to Melissa in almost a year. Not because we fought. No. We never truly fought, but because life, or perhaps the ghosts of our childhood, always kept us at a polite distance. There was something between us that never healed. Something from the years spent in our parents' house after the divorce. Something from how she withdrew into silence while I tried to be the fixer. Even now, the sound of her tears stirred an old instinct in me, a kind of reflex carved from blood and guilt. "Come here," I said. "Just come stay here for a while. I'll help you figure it out." It didn't take long. A week later, she showed up on my doorstep with 3 bags, a bent umbrella, and that defeated look people carry when they've run out of excuses. I lived alone, still do, in the house our grandparents left me, an old white Craftsman with creaking floors and a wraparound porch that always seemed to sigh when the wind pushed through it. I never imagined Melissa living here. I never imagined her folding herself into my world, into my carefully constructed silence. The first few weeks were strangely beautiful. She was tender in a way I hadn't seen since we were teenagers. She cooked sometimes. She cleaned. She made jokes during dinner and talked about things she remembered. How we used to jump from our bunk beds into piles of laundry. How Mom used to sing along to James Taylor when she was drunk. I let myself believe we were healing, or at least building something new. I even told her one night when we sat on the porch sipping cheap wine that I was glad she was here. She looked at me like I'd given her something sacred. But time changes everything. She started making little comments. About the house, the way I arranged the living room, the color I'd painted the walls. "You really chose yellow for the kitchen? That's bold." Then it shifted. She started talking about how the house was part of our family history, how Grandma would have wanted us both to have something from it. I shrugged it off the first few times, not realizing she was laying down, stepping stones towards something larger. I kept thinking, she's just grateful, maybe nostalgic. I didn't want to see the edge sharpening under her voice. One morning, I found her in the attic with a box of old photos, holding up a picture of our grandfather standing on the porch of the house, his arm around a much younger version of Melissa. "See?" she said. "This house has always felt like mine too." Her tone wasn't soft anymore. It had gained a firmness that felt deliberate. I remember feeling suddenly cold, despite the late summer heat pressing through the vents. Then, the mail came, a letter addressed to both of us, from a lawyer. I thought it was a mistake until I opened it and saw the headline, "Notice of Intent to Claim Property Share." My name, her name, legal words stacked like knives on a table. I sat down on the floor of my hallway, the letter crinkling in my hands, my heartbeat drumming against my ribs. I confronted her that evening. I asked her what it meant. She didn't look surprised. She looked calm, like someone who had been rehearsing for this moment. "It's just fair," she said. "You know it is. It's our family's house. You shouldn't be the only one to benefit from it." I couldn't speak. I walked out of the room, walked into the backyard, and stood there staring at the dying hydrangeas until the sun disappeared behind the trees. Fair. That word turned in my chest like a knife. Fair, after I paid every property tax bill on time. Fair, after I replaced the pipes, fixed the roof, refinished the hardwood floors myself with bloodied hands and aching knees. Fair, after I let her in, asked for nothing, made room in my life, in my home, without ever calculating a debt. She wasn't just asking for a place. She was asking for ownership, and she'd brought the law with her. I started to keep track. Every word, every passive-aggressive comment, every time she slammed a door or left dishes in the sink for me to wash, every time she said "this house" instead of "your house." It built up inside me like smoke behind a closed door. But I didn't ask her to leave. Not yet. I called my own lawyer. I didn't want to. The idea of dragging family into court made my stomach churn. But this wasn't about pride anymore. This was about protecting something I had spent years holding together, something I had built from the ashes of everything our family had broken. I found old records, documents that proved the deed had only my name, letters from our grandmother that spoke about why she left it to me. "You were always the one who stayed," she wrote once in her slanted cursive. "You were the one who held the pieces." But now my sister had chosen to see those pieces as something she could divide, and that's when I realized this wasn't about the house. This was about her resentment, unspoken for years, boiling over into legal terms. This was about the life she didn't have, the choices she regretted, the paths she watched me walk while she remained in place. This was about every holiday we didn't spend together, every phone call she didn't return, every moment she sat with her pain instead of reaching out, and now she was reaching, with claws. I didn't sleep for nights. I would lie there in the dark with the ceiling fan ticking above me, counting the rotations, trying to slow my breathing while her presence moved like a shadow down the hallway. I began to flinch when I heard her footsteps. The silence between us had grown so thick it felt like insulation, a barrier made of old wounds and unspoken accusations. She stopped saying good morning. She stopped asking if I needed anything from the store. The kitchen became a war zone of unwashed cups and passive-aggressive fridge notes. "Please replace what you use. We're out of olive oil again. Some of us like the thermostat at a reasonable temperature." I started locking my bedroom door. I didn't even realize I was doing it until one night I stood outside it with my hand on the knob, key in the other, like I was locking a vault. I whispered to myself, "This is still your house," but the words felt hollow, like an echo trying to find its original voice. My lawyer told me not to engage. "Keep a record of everything," she said. "Don't confront her again. Let the courts handle the conflict." It sounded so clean, so rational. But this was my sister. This was blood. We'd bathed in the same tub as toddlers. We used to braid each other's hair on Sunday nights and whisper secrets in the dark about what life would be like when we were adults. I never imagined it would be this. Melissa had hired someone, a real estate mediator or something close to it. She told him, loud enough for me to hear through the living room wall, that she believed the house was marital inheritance property. I laughed when I heard it, one of those dry, angry barks that leaves your mouth before your brain catches it. Melissa had never been married. I didn't know if she even understood the legal term she was using, but it didn't matter. She was grasping at straws and building a fire with them. Then she stopped pretending. She started telling people, neighbors, old friends from high school, even our cousin Lori, who called me in a fury after Melissa told her I was stealing what was meant to be shared. I felt the story unraveling around me, each version of her narrative more twisted than the last, like vines tightening around a house that once stood in the open. I invited Lori over. I made tea. I showed her the will. I showed her the deed. "Didn't take anything," I said. "I just let her in. That's all I did." Lori nodded, but her eyes were sad. "I think she just wants to matter to someone," she said. I swallowed the lump in my throat. "And she thought suing me would do that?" "She's hurt," Lori said. "You were always the strong one. She sees you and feels like she missed her chance." I wanted to scream. I wanted to shake them all and ask how pain could justify betrayal. I wanted someone to see how I was hurting too. One morning I came downstairs and found Melissa rearranging the photo wall. She'd taken down all the pictures I'd hung, my graduation photo, our grandparents' wedding day, even the one of our dog, Max, in a Halloween costume, and replaced them with pictures of her, as a child, at a friend's wedding, on the beach with a man I didn't recognize. "What are you doing?" I asked. She didn't look at me. She adjusted one of the frames. "Making it feel like home." "It's not your home." Her hand froze on the frame. She turned slowly. Her eyes were glassy but hard. "Then why did you let me in?" I had no answer. Not one that would make sense to either of us now. After that, I started making plans. Quiet ones. I didn't want to escalate things, but I knew I couldn't live like this. I couldn't live in fear that the house I'd poured my soul into would be pulled out from under me like a rug. I started speaking to my lawyer more often. We compiled a timeline, every date and detail, every receipt and letter and signed document. Melissa must have known something had shifted. She started being overly nice again, offering to cook dinner, asking how my day was, complimenting my clothes like we were sisters at brunch. But it wasn't real. It was strategy. A lull before the next strike. I caught her one night in the study going through my desk drawers. "What are you looking for?" I said, my voice calm but firm. She jumped, then straightened, too quickly. "Nothing, just looking for tape." "There's tape in the kitchen. I thought maybe you kept some here. Don't go through my things." The mask cracked for a moment. I saw it. A flicker of rage in her eyes, like a match that hadn't yet been struck. She walked out without another word. I locked everything after that. Desk, filing cabinet, my room. I even started carrying some of the more important papers with me, tucked into my work bag like secrets I didn't trust the walls to keep. The silence returned, thicker now, like mold spreading in the corners. We didn't speak. We didn't eat together. We moved around each other like ghosts in the same haunted house, each one trying to pretend the other wasn't already laying claim to the furniture. Then the court date arrived, a white envelope, hand-delivered. Her name, my name, a case number, a date. I sat on the porch that night with a glass of whiskey, staring into the dark yard where fireflies blinked without rhythm. My hands shook, not from fear, from grief. This was really happening. She was really doing it. My sister was taking me to court to try and own a piece of the only place I'd ever felt safe. The morning of the hearing was gray, quiet, the kind of sky that looks like it's holding its breath. I woke before the alarm, heart drumming a rhythm I couldn't silence. Melissa was already gone, her room unnervingly tidy, like she'd wanted to leave no trace of herself behind in case she lost. Or maybe it was confidence. Maybe it was the final move in her carefully laid out performance, presenting herself to the court as the reasonable sister, the one with clean hands and a wounded heart. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee I couldn't finish, staring at the grooves in the wood, remembering when I'd sanded and stained it myself. Everything in that house had my fingerprint on it. My sweat, my choices, my late nights with a hammer and splintered palms. I'd built something that felt like mine, not just because I held the deed, but because it had my story carved into every inch. I thought about not showing up, just letting it happen. Letting her win if it meant I wouldn't have to look her in the eye and see a stranger in my sister's skin. But then I thought of Grandma's letter, the one I'd reread 100 times. "This is your sanctuary. Protect it." The courtroom was colder than I expected. It smelled like paper and polish and years of quiet arguments. My lawyer, Karen, a sharp-eyed woman with a voice like gravel and patience like iron, sat beside me, flipping through our documentation with the calm of someone reading weather reports. Melissa sat across the room with her attorney, young, eager, the kind who probably still believed every battle had a moral high ground. She wouldn't look at me. Not once. The judge was older, quiet, with the kind of expression that refused to let you know what he was thinking. When the case number was called, everything slowed down. The world, the noise, the years that brought us here, they all blurred together into one moment where the gavel dropped and time split open. Melissa's lawyer spoke first. He painted a picture of shared history, of a family home passed through, generations of a sibling who took more than her rightful share. He used words like entitlement and emotional inheritance, phrases that twisted logic into something just abstract enough to feel believable. He said Melissa had lived in the home, contributed to its maintenance, and had always believed she would, one day, share ownership. He even brought up that photo of Grandpa and Melissa on the porch, as if a snapshot could replace a legal document. I didn't cry. Not then. Karen stood up like a blade. She didn't shout, she didn't argue, she presented. She laid out the will, the deed, the receipts. She read Grandma's letter aloud, her voice steady, anchoring every sentence in truth. She spoke of how long I had lived in that house, of how I had never charged Melissa rent, of how the home had been cared for, maintained, paid for, all by me. She showed the history of every tax, every repair, every proof of ownership. She ended with a simple line. "Charity is not co-ownership." Melissa flinched. When it was over, the judge didn't decide that day. He said he'd take it under consideration. That it was complicated. That family cases like this rarely left anyone whole. We walked out in silence. Karen squeezed my shoulder once and went to make a call. I saw Melissa standing near the steps, arms crossed, face unreadable. For a moment, I saw her as she used to be. 13 years old, sitting on the edge of the pool, legs kicking the water, telling me she wished we could stay little forever. That memory hit me like a fist to the chest. I walked up to her. My voice came out low and tight. "Why are you doing this?" She blinked, her mouth twisted like she didn't expect me to ask. I wanted something that felt like it was mine too. "It was never yours." She shook her head, eyes glassy. "That house was always home to both of us. You just got there first." I wanted to scream. I wanted to remind her of everything I did, of every favor, every sacrifice. I wanted to throw her words back at her and demand an apology, but none of that would fix what was broken. So I just said, "You were never locked out. You slammed the door yourself." And then I walked away. The waiting was the worst part. 2 weeks passed, and every day felt like standing on a cliff, not knowing when the ground would shift. Melissa stayed in the house during that time. We didn't speak. She moved like a ghost, and I stayed in my room most nights, pretending I didn't hear her crying through the walls. I thought about asking her to leave again, but something told me to wait. Maybe part of me still wanted her to change her mind, to end this mess with a whispered, "I'm sorry," and a suitcase packed quietly before dawn. But she never did. The decision came in a white envelope slid under the door by a courier. I opened it with trembling hands. Petition denied. Full ownership remains with current deed holder. No financial obligation to the claimant. I sat down on the edge of the couch and let the letter fall from my hands. The victory didn't feel like a victory. It felt like the silence after a storm, when the house is still standing but everything inside is soaked and bent. I had won. But I'd lost something I couldn't name. Melissa was gone that evening. No goodbye, no note. Just an empty room, a few hangers left swinging in the closet, the scent of her lavender shampoo still lingering in the bathroom. I walked through the house that night, touching everything like it might vanish. The picture wall, the kitchen counter, the dent in the hallway where we used to race each other and crash into the corners. I was alone again, but not the same kind of alone I'd known before. This was the kind that comes after betrayal, after love is weaponized, after you give someone shelter and they try to claim the roof. The days after Melissa left were impossibly quiet, not peaceful. Quiet in that heavy, unnatural way that clings to a place after it's been emptied of something once living. The silence no longer soothed me. It accused me. Every floorboard she used to walk on creaked louder. Every room seemed to echo with what had happened and what couldn't be taken back. I kept waiting for her to call, or text, or send a message through someone else. But nothing came. I even found myself checking social media, looking for her in blurry photos posted by distant friends, trying to piece together where she'd gone, if she was okay, if she hated me. I wanted to be angry. I tried to feed that part of myself, the part that felt betrayed, used, wounded beyond words. I went over every memory, every moment that now felt laced with manipulation. The nights I let her cry on my shoulder, the mornings I left her breakfast out even when I was late for work, the time I fixed her car for the 3rd time without saying a word. I thought if I added them all up like evidence, it would build a case strong enough to bury the pain. But instead of rage, something else crept in. Grief. Not just grief for what she did, but for who we used to be. For the bond we'd lost years ago, long before the lawsuit, before the house, before adulthood turned us into adversaries. I remembered being 5, maybe 6, and waking up after a nightmare, calling for her instead of our parents. She'd crawled into bed with me and whispered stories until I stopped shaking. I remembered her singing along with the radio in the back seat of our dad's car, legs swinging, making up harmonies just to make me laugh. That Melissa was gone. And maybe I had a part in losing her too. Maybe we both let each other slip through. The cracks. I found myself avoiding certain rooms in the house, her old bedroom mostly. I couldn't bring myself to clean it out yet. Her scent still lingered, soft, like fading flowers and laundry soap. Her drawer still had a couple of tangled bracelets and a half-used notebook with a page that read, "Maybe we're both just trying to go home to a version of ourselves that doesn't exist anymore." I stared at that line for a long time. Eventually, I packed her things. I did it quietly, like I was afraid of waking something up. I didn't throw anything away. I folded everything neatly, placed it in boxes, taped them shut with slow, even lines. I labeled them gently. Melissa. Clothes, Melissa. Books, Melissa. Miscellaneous. I dropped them off at a local storage unit and sent her a message with the code. Simple, neutral, no expectations. Just, your things are safe. They're here if you want them. She never replied. The house began to feel like mine again, inch by inch, but not the way it used to. I found myself repainting the walls, not to erase her, but to mark a new chapter. I chose softer colors, a sage green for the hallway, light blue for the guest room. I reupholstered the old armchair in the living room, the one we used to fight over as kids. I donated the sofa she'd picked out. I kept the photo of Grandpa on the porch, but I moved it to a hallway less traveled. I started sleeping again, but my dreams were strange. Often, I'd see her, Melissa, as a little girl, running down the hall, laughing, calling my name. Sometimes I'd follow. Sometimes I'd just stand still, listening, wishing I could run backwards through time. One Sunday morning, weeks later, I found an envelope tucked into the mailbox. No return address, just my name in familiar handwriting. Inside was a short note. I'm sorry for how everything ended. I was angry at the world, and I turned that anger on you. You didn't deserve it. You were the only one who ever stayed. I don't want anything else from you. I never did, not really. I just didn't know how to ask you to see me. I hope someday we can talk again. I hope you're okay. I read it twice, 3 times. I held it in my hands like it was a relic. Something precious and fragile and not quite enough, but more than nothing. I didn't cry. I thought I might, but instead I just sat on the porch for a long time, staring at the trees bending in the wind. And I realized I didn't hate her. I never had. I hated what happened. I hated what desperation could do to a person. But I still loved my sister. And I probably always would, in some haunted, complicated way. I didn't respond to the letter. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Some wounds don't close with words. But I did one thing. I took one of the photos she'd put on the wall. That one of her, on the beach, arms stretched to the sky, laughing into the sun, and I framed it properly. I hung it in the hallway. Not to forgive. Not to forget. But to remember that once, before all the bitterness and paperwork and courtroom silence, there was a girl who danced in the light, and a sister who loved her more than she ever said aloud, and no lawsuit could take that away.